Nearly half of Americans don't know that one of the most common foods in their diet may raise their risk of colorectal cancer, and that food is processed meat. If you're new here, welcome. I'm a UK internal medicine doctor and I make weekly videos on health topics that actually matter. Subscribe if you want to stay informed. Now, I want to be very clear from the start. This is not a fear-mongering video, and it is not a lecture telling people they can never eat bacon or a hot dog again. My goal is to give you clear, balanced, medically grounded information so you understand what the evidence actually says, what processed meats are, why they may increase risk, how big that risk appears to be, and what practical steps you can take if you want to lower your risk without becoming obsessive about food. This topic matters because a recent report highlighted that 45% of Americans are unaware of the link between processed meat and colorectal cancer risk. And at the same time, colorectal cancer remains a major public health concern. So let's start with the most basic question, because terminology can be confusing. What exactly counts as processed meat? Processed meat is not just any meat, and it doesn't simply mean meat that came in a packet. It refers to meat that has been transformed in some way to improve preservation or flavor, typically through methods such as salting, curing, smoking, fermentation, or the addition of preservatives. That definition is consistent with both the World Health Organization and the experts quoted in the health article. In other words, the concern is not just that it is meat, but that it has been chemically or physically altered in ways that change the final product. Examples include foods that many people eat every week without thinking twice about them: bacon, sausages, hot dogs, ham, salami, pastrami, beef jerky, corned beef, pepperoni, bologna, and many deli meats or cold cuts. Even when these products are made from turkey or chicken rather than pork or beef, if they have been cured, smoked, preserved, or otherwise processed in the same way, they may still fall into that category. The American Institute for Cancer Research specifically notes that even chicken or turkey versions may be healthier in some ways, but it is still best to minimize all forms of processed meat. This is one reason the issue can be easy to miss. Processed meats are often marketed as convenient, protein-rich, family-friendly foods. They appear at breakfast, in lunch boxes, at barbecues, on pizza, in sandwiches, and in quick snacks. People hear the word protein and understandably assume they are making a decent choice. But from a health perspective, there is a real difference between getting protein from foods like beans, lentils, fish, eggs, yogurt, tofu, or unprocessed poultry, and getting it from heavily processed meats that have been cured, preserved, or smoked. Now let's talk about what the research actually suggests, because this is where headlines can sound dramatic without giving the context people need. For more than a decade, the World Health Organization's Cancer Agency has classified processed meat as a Group 1 carcinogen. That means there is sufficient evidence that processed meat causes cancer in humans, specifically colorectal cancer. This classification is based on the strength of the scientific evidence, not on the size of the danger from a single exposure. That distinction is extremely important. It does not mean processed meat is as dangerous as smoking in everyday life. It means the evidence linking it to cancer is strong and convincing. One of the best-known figures from the research is this. Eating about 50 grams of processed meat per day is associated with roughly an 18% increase in colorectal cancer risk. 50 grams is not a huge amount. Depending on the product, that may be around one hot dog or a couple of strips of bacon. The key point is that this is about regular daily intake over time, not occasional intake once in a while. It is the repeated pattern that matters most. WHO also notes that in the studies reviewed, risk generally increased with the amount of processed meat consumed. Now, as a doctor, I think it is crucial to explain relative risk versus absolute risk, because otherwise people either panic unnecessarily or dismiss the information entirely. An 18% relative increase sounds frightening, but the absolute increase is much smaller. The health article gives a helpful example. If an average person's lifetime risk of developing colorectal cancer is about 5%, then an 18% relative increase would raise that to roughly 5.75%. So we are not talking about processed meat guaranteeing cancer. We are talking about a modest but meaningful increase in risk that becomes important at the population level because so many people eat these foods regularly. That is the kind of nuance the public deserves, and that population level point really matters. When a risk factor is common, Even a relatively small increase in individual risk can translate into a much larger public health burden. WHO explains that although these risks are small, they are important because many people around the world consume meat regularly, and processed meat consumption is widespread. So the message is not that one bacon sandwich is a catastrophe. The message is that if processed meat becomes a routine feature of your diet, day after day and year after year, that pattern may increase your risk over time. So why might processed meat raise the risk of colorectal cancer in the first place? There are several biologically plausible mechanisms. One major concern is the presence of nitrates and nitrites, which are commonly used in processed meats for preservation, color, and flavor. According to the experts quoted in the health article, these compounds can react in the acidic environment of the stomach and within the gut to form N-nitroso compounds. These compounds are known to be carcinogenic, meaning they can damage DNA in the cells lining the colon. If DNA damage is not properly repaired, mutations can accumulate, and over time that can contribute to cancer development. There are other possible mechanisms as well. Smoking, curing, and high-temperature cooking can generate substances such as polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, often called PAHs, and heterocyclic amines, often called HCAs. These compounds have been studied because they may damage cells and contribute to carcinogenic processes. The American Institute for Cancer Research notes that compounds tied to cancer are produced from smoking, curing, and nitrate or nitrite-based additives, and WHO also discusses carcinogenic chemicals produced by high-temperature cooking and direct contact with flame or hot surfaces. If the processed meat is made from red meat, heme iron may add to the risk as well. If I were to simplify that for the general public, I would put it like this. Processed meats can expose the digestive tract to compounds that may damage cells, stress the body's repair systems, and make the environment in the colon less healthy over time. Cancer usually does not arise from one meal or one bad week of eating. It is often the result of repeated exposures, genetic susceptibility, age, inflammation, lifestyle factors, and plain bad luck interacting over many years. That is why the language around this topic should be calm and realistic. We are talking about risk, not certainty. Now, if you are listening to this and thinking, right, doctor, but what am I supposed to do with this information? The good news is that the answer is not all or nothing. You do not need to become perfect overnight. In fact, one of the most helpful ways to approach this is to stop thinking in terms of total restriction and start thinking in terms of frequency, routine, and default choices. Experts quoted in the health article suggest that processed meats are best avoided or saved for occasional consumption, rather than making them a regular part of the diet. That, to me, is a realistic and medically sensible message. One very practical strategy is to prepare alternative proteins in advance. If you batch cook chicken, turkey, fish, lentils, beans, or chickpeas at the start of the week, you are much less likely to reach automatically for processed deli meats at lunchtime. The problem for many people is not that they love salami so much they cannot live without it. The problem is convenience. If the easy option in the fridge is ham, that is what gets eaten. If the easy option is shredded chicken, grilled salmon, or bean filling for wraps, that healthier choice becomes far more likely. The health article specifically suggests batch cooking proteins for easy lunches as one way to cut back. Breakfast is another place where small changes can make a real difference. If bacon or sausage is part of your normal morning routine, try rotating in other protein-rich foods such as eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, beans, or even leftovers from the night before if that suits your lifestyle. Many people fall into repetitive breakfast habits because mornings are rushed, but if you can change even 3 or 4 breakfasts a week, that may substantially reduce your processed meat intake over the course of a year. Again, this is about sustainable habits, not food guilt. Another sensible approach is to reduce rather than eliminate. You do not necessarily have to ban your favorite foods forever. If you love pepperoni pizza, perhaps you order it less often, or choose half as much pepperoni and add vegetables. If you usually put several strips of bacon into a meal, perhaps you use less and treat it more like a flavoring than the main event. If your default sandwich is processed deli meat every day, perhaps you change that to 1 or 2 days a week and use another filling the rest of the time. This kind of gradual reduction is often much more successful than extreme rules that people abandon after 2 weeks. The article specifically recommends reducing rather than eliminating as a practical strategy. And perhaps the most useful mindset of all is this: Make processed meats occasional foods rather than daily staples. Save the hot dog for the barbecue, the bacon for a special brunch, the charcuterie for a holiday gathering. People often enjoy these foods more when they are occasional anyway. The American Institute for Cancer Research recommends eating little, if any, processed meat and limiting red meat overall. That does not require perfection, but it does support the idea that these foods should not be a routine dietary foundation. It is also important to zoom out, because processed meat is only one part of the colorectal cancer picture. Other lifestyle factors matter too. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention lists lack of regular physical activity, a diet low in fruits and vegetables, a low fiber and high fat diet, or a diet high in processed meats, overweight and obesity, alcohol consumption, and tobacco use as lifestyle factors that may contribute to increased colorectal cancer risk. So if someone focuses obsessively on cutting out sausage while ignoring smoking, excess alcohol, inactivity, and obesity, they are missing the bigger picture. Let's talk briefly about diet beyond processed meat. The health article notes that diets rich in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and dietary fiber are strongly associated with a lower risk of colorectal cancer. From a medical standpoint, this makes sense. These foods tend to support bowel health, improve stool bulk and transit, feed beneficial gut bacteria, and are associated with better overall metabolic health. While not every dietary study is perfectly consistent, a generally fiber-rich, minimally processed dietary pattern is one of the most reasonable recommendations we can make for long-term health. Exercise matters as well. Regular physical activity is linked to a decreased risk of colorectal cancer, according to the National Cancer Institute, and the CDC likewise lists lack of regular physical activity as a contributing lifestyle risk factor. This does not mean you need to become a marathon runner. It means moving your body consistently. Walking, cycling, swimming, resistance training, gardening, dancing, anything you can sustain is likely to be better than sitting all day and doing nothing. The best exercise is the one you will still be doing 6 months from now. Weight is another factor we should not ignore. Obesity is linked to an increased risk of colorectal cancer and death from colorectal cancer, according to the National Cancer Institute, and the CDC includes overweight and obesity among the risk factors. This is a sensitive topic, and it should be handled compassionately, not judgmentally. But medically speaking, maintaining a healthy weight through sustainable nutrition, sleep, activity, and overall lifestyle can be part of a broader risk reduction strategy. Alcohol and smoking also deserve a direct mention. The health article notes that alcohol is linked to increased colorectal cancer risk, and the CDC lists both alcohol use and tobacco use as relevant risk factors. The National Cancer Institute states that drinking 3 or more alcoholic beverages per day increases colorectal cancer risk, while cigarette smoking is linked not only to colorectal cancer itself, but also to the formation and recurrence of colorectal adenomas, which are precancerous growths. These are highly actionable risk factors, and in many cases, reducing alcohol and stopping smoking may have health benefits that go far beyond colorectal cancer prevention. But if there is one point I really want the public to remember, it is this: no diet change is a substitute for screening. Screening is one of the most powerful tools we have because it can detect colorectal cancer early and, importantly, can find and remove precancerous polyps before they turn into cancer. The health article quotes an expert saying that the single most impactful thing an adult can do is get screened, with colonoscopy starting at age 45 or earlier if there are risk factors. The National Cancer Institute also emphasizes that screening helps find and treat colorectal cancer early, and that removal of larger colorectal polyps may lower the risk of cancer developing. So yes, food matters, but screening saves lives. So if I were to summarize all of this as plainly as possible, here's what I would say to the general public. Processed meats such as bacon, sausage, hot dogs, salami, ham, and deli meats are linked to an increased risk of colorectal cancer. The evidence for that link is strong. The increase in risk for any one person is not enormous, but it is real, and it matters more when these foods are eaten regularly over time. The likely reasons include compounds formed during processing, preservation, and certain cooking methods that can damage cells in the colon. The most sensible response is not panic, but moderation. Eat less processed meat, eat it less often, and build your diet more around whole, fiber-rich foods and less around convenience meats. Combine that with physical activity, not smoking, limiting alcohol, maintaining a healthy weight where possible, and keeping up with screening. That is a far more powerful approach than focusing on a single ingredient or chasing health myths on the internet. And finally, if you take just one thing away from this video, let it be this. You do not need to be perfect to reduce risk. You just need to be aware enough to make better default choices more often. If processed meat is an everyday habit, consider making it an occasional one. If your diet is low in fiber, work on adding more whole plant foods. If you are due screening, book it. These are the kinds of boring, unglamorous steps that genuinely protect health. And in medicine, those are often the steps that matter most.